to be back. As Senator Simmons mentioned, I spent time as a Rutgers, yes, hi, Ralph, you just popped up, hi. Time on the Rutgers University Senate. The mission of the Eagleton Institute of Politics, where I am, is really to link the study of politics with the practice of politics. And I really look at my time, honestly, on the Senate as an opportunity for me to link the study of politics with the practice of politics. It was a moment for me to practice what I preach, to practice what I teach. And so I learned a great deal about politics just by serving on the Rutgers University Senate. Was fortunate to get guidance and have great role models in Peter Gillett and John Oliver and Ann Gould. And my time as co-chairing the Student Affairs Committee, certainly collaborating and learning so much from my colleagues, from other faculty, other staff, and students. And so in many ways, it was a real learning experience for me when I served on the Rutgers Senate. And I would say, just to sort of preface my remarks, much like the campus, the Rutgers University Senate can serve as a model on how to come together to solve difficult problems. And as we all know, there are some difficult problems out there, globally, nationally, and on our university. But again, the Rutgers Senate is a place to model democracy. So what I'm hoping to do today, and I'm going to take a second and cross my fingers that you can see my screen. Okay, I'm assuming everyone can see that. You'll tell me if you can't. Okay, great. So just want to take a little bit of time to talk a little bit about some of the work that I do here at Eagleton, that we do here at Eagleton, that I think can be perhaps helpful and informative. As Senator Simmons mentioned, as we are grappling with these really difficult problems. And I neglected to say, although I am not currently on the Senate, been watching from the sidelines from getting to witness and really applaud the leadership and modeling of civic discourse, civil discourse being provided by your executive committee now and your Senate chair, Senator Simmons. So I want to share a little bit. This is what I hope to do today. Just give you a little bit of sense of what the scholarship is on civic engagement education. Share a little bit about the pedagogical toolkit that exists when it comes to teaching democratic citizenship and engagement. Talk a little bit about the research that's out there on the important role of campus culture and how campus culture plays an important role in impacting democratic learning. Then I can give you some specifics about a course actually that I created here as a Burn seminar and really have built upon. A Burn seminar called Talking Politics, Disagreeing Without Being Disagreeable. And then share a little bit about how this work in the classroom can inform broader efforts taking place either on this campus or even nationally. And hopefully there'll be a bit of time left over to have some discussion afterwards. But I always think it's nice to start with this quote from John Dewey. As folks know, John Dewey was an American philosopher, educational reformer, and he writes, "Democracy needs to be born anew every generation, and education is the midwife." And I think this is an important idea to really ground our conversation in. This idea that democracy, democratic citizenship, is not genetic. It's not innate. It requires teaching, and that it can be taught. My background is political science. I have a doctorate in American politics. In political science, we talk a lot about agents of political socialization. For sure, parents are really strong agents of political socialization, but right up there, as far as impact, are educators, whether in formal ways or informal ways. The school, one's education plays a tremendous role in educating us to be democratic citizens. What does it mean to be competent? What does it mean to teach students to be democratically competent, informed, and engaged citizens? It's worth mentioning at the outset, the theoretical frameworks of civic engagement education really conceptualize democratic competence and civic preparedness as multifaceted. There's so much discussion right now about civic education in K-12 and what does it mean and what's appropriate in the school. You know, it's worth, again, the theoretical frameworks for teaching civic engagement really look at civic preparedness as more than strictly political knowledge. Certainly, we want our students to have a really good sense of American history and facts and figures, to know who important political actors are. But it's certainly more than that, more than having that information and infusing in students this sense of having a strong political knowledge base. It's important, but not enough. In addition to having students who really have a solid base for civic knowledge, it's also just as important for students to have the skills and even the disposition to be democratic citizens. So in research having to do with civic engagement education, we look at equipping students with both a cognitive skill set and a participative skill set. Certainly that's something we do here on this campus via the Eagleton Institute of Politics. We want students to be able to understand politics, to have the sense of cognitive, that's cognitive skill set where they can consume news, think critically, interpret political cartoons, the political skills, the participative skills they need also. Want our students to know how to find their polling location on a Rutgers campus, to know how to update their voter registration when they move to a different residence hall. But then finally also the disposition to be democratic citizens. That has to do with preparing our students, equipping our students with a sense of confidence, a sense of efficacy, a sense of preparedness to participate in the democratic process, a sense that they belong sitting around the table, engaging in deliberation. So really emphasizing at the outset that preparing our students to be informed and engaged democratic citizens is really a multifaceted job. So I think the question then is, okay, well, how do we do so? How do we do that? Certainly over the last 15, 20 years, a really robust body of scholarship has developed on how to teach democracy, how to teach democratic citizenship. Not all of it comes from political science, but as I said, I'm a political scientist, so I'm going to start there by highlighting work that's been done by political scientists. But as I said, there's a growing body of scholarship, and out of that scholarship comes a set of best practices. And I would say for the most part, in order to infuse students with the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that they need to be democratic citizens, there's a real emphasis on experiential learning, active pedagogy, getting students engaged in such things as service learning, simulations, discussions, debates. Here is where engaging in political discussion is so important as part of students' learning experience. But there have been a number of edited volumes by the American Political Science Association, for example, that I've been fortunate to be involved in, speaking to political scientists, speaking to educators across disciplines, and even speaking to educators across the globe. The challenges that the United States is facing when it comes to the health and vitality of its democracy certainly are not unique to the United States. Finally, I'd like to mention too, when speaking about the scholarship of teaching democracy, just fairly recently, there was a task force pulled together by the American Political Science Association on rethinking the political science major. I was fortunate to be part of that task force, and our findings are coming out, they're imminent, but really providing political scientists a model, a guide on how you can infuse your teaching with that experiential learning that we know is so important and so meaningful when it comes to creating democratic citizens. As I mentioned, there's so much attention to civic education, especially in K-12, but as we can all imagine, the role of the college, the role of higher education is critical. And I would just, share this quote from the National Task Force on Civic Learning and Democratic Engagement that reads, "As a democracy, the United States depends on a knowledgeable, public-spirited, and engaged population. Education plays a fundamental role in building civic vitality, and in the 21st century, higher education has a distinctive role to play in the renewal of US democracy. Again, playing that role of midwife and creating the next generation of democratic citizens. So, this democratic learning can take place in the classroom, and I'm going to share with you a class that I teach, but it's worth noting that it also comes from campus culture. Just the pervasive campus culture can be educative. And I want to start by sharing with you some research, a report or research that I value highly, I think is really important on this topic, conducted by Nancy Thomas and Margaret Brower at the Institute for Democracy in Higher Education at Tufts University. And just to give you a little background, Rutgers University is one of hundreds, thousands of colleges and universities around the country that participate in something called the National Study for Learning, Voting, and Engagement, also known as NSOLVE. It's thanks to NSOLVE that campuses have a really good estimate of their voter registration and turnout numbers. If you want to know Rutgers, they're on our Are You Voting website. But based on this research that they've done, Nancy Thomas and Margaret Brower identified those campuses that had the highest voter turnout rates and those campuses that had the lowest voter turnout rates, and basically embedded themselves in those campuses. Really a long-term longitudinal qualitative research study where they wanted to get a sense of what's in the water in those campuses where you have students with really high voter turnout rates. And what they were able to find was that the campus culture played a tremendous role. They write, pervasive political learning and engagement is practiced and modeled year-round and is deeply embedded into institutional norms, behaviors, and the way things are done. On those campuses where students had really high voter turnout rates, they identified these different elements, these different practices, norms, practices on that campus. And again, if you want to learn more, I'm happy to send the URL afterwards for this report. I'm happy to share this PowerPoint, but they identified a few. Social cohesion being one, high levels of trust between members of a campus community, diversity as a realized practice, the sense that students were part of decision-making, had authentic decision-making roles, high rates of political engagement, students paying attention to politics. But the fifth is really worth noting, and that was pervasive political discussion. They found that on those campuses that had high voter turnout rates, students expected to be confronted with political discussions. They got used to, they were accustomed to having political discussion in the classroom, in their residence halls, in extracurriculars, throughout campus life. Now, again, it's worth emphasizing none of these work in isolation. It's the combination of these factors that really were indicative, predictive of high rates of voter turnout on this on these high-performing campuses. So I'd like to share a little bit about that last piece, the pervasive political discussion. As Senator Boykus brought up earlier, this is a moment where campuses can be, should be, helping our students, helping our campus as a whole have difficult conversations. And there are some really very difficult conversations taking place on our campus and in campuses around the country. So I'm going to share with you a course that I piloted probably 5 years ago now as a Burn seminar, have maintained it. I have a journal article in the Journal of Political Science Education about the course, and have really used it as a launching pad for other work on this campus. It's a course that really is much everything Eagleton does is really rooted in, informed by research. So we created a 1-semester course through the Burn seminar called Talking Politics, Disagreeing Without Being Disagreeable. Builds on the theoretical background when it comes to research on political discourse, but also the best practices. So I want to share just a few elements of what we include in this course. Again, we can discuss it further in the Q&A. I would say the first really important practice that we embed into this course, Talking Politics, which is certainly something that can be used in all classrooms. I now use it not just in my Burn seminar, but in all the classes I teach, is starting every semester by creating a shared sense of norms and practices for discussion. We're an Institute of Politics. We talk politics. And so we really let our students know, if you're going to be here taking coursework, we are going to talk about politics. And we want these conversations to be honest. We want them to be candid. We want them to be authentic, but we also want them to be productive. We want students to feel as if they're being heard. We want students to feel secure. So how do we do that? How could we put together a set of norms and practices that we will abide by throughout the semester that will enable us to have those sorts of conversations? So every semester, we begin, I still go old school with butcher paper. As a class, we identify what would it take for our class to be able to have those kinds of conversations throughout the semester. Typically some of the norms and practices that are identified are things such as sharing the airspace, making sure you're leaving space for other people to speak, assuming goodwill about each other, listen for understanding, approach these conversations with a sense of inquiry. Obviously things like no name calling, no stereotyping, and really listening to understand each other, asking questions if you don't understand what someone has said. And so what we do is we really write these out. It's a class exercise where we together create a set of norms and practices that we often say are not going to be a contract necessarily, but a compact, an agreement that we come to together and that we hold ourselves accountable with every week. And that we share responsibility for the quality of the conversation. And at the end of every class, we'll have a difficult conversation, but at the end ask, how'd we do? Did we live up to our norms and practices, the ideals that we have? I often offer students an anonymous exit ticket also, so they can share with me anonymously via Qualtrics how they think things went. And that has been a really useful practice for me in my coursework. And I know many faculty use it on the Rutgers campus. And again, not just in political science, but it can be used across disciplines. A way to, maybe not ensure, but heighten the likelihood that you're going to have the sort of conversations that we aspire to have. A few other core elements that I embed in this class, Talking Politics, include real skill building. Identifying the role of active listening in having a productive conversation, the role of perspective taking, empathy, being able to see something from someone else's point of view, fact checking, how to fact check ourselves, how to fact check each other. This is a seminar. Students are given readings. We engage in a lot of discussion. We also, though, bring in speakers who can model that sort of discourse. Typically, every semester, we try to bring in representatives from the Rutgers Dems and the Rutgers Republicans. We've brought in state legislators, Republicans and Democrats, again, to demonstrate for students that you can disagree without being disagreeable. And with every week too, almost every week, we hold a Socratic seminar, or I put students literally in a circle, and we will bring up a prompt, something timely, something that will spur conversation, but most importantly, something that will give students an opportunity to practice these skills. And then at the end, see, how'd we do? Did we share the airspace? Did we really listen for understanding rather than to be persuading someone else of our view? So this is something that I've done in the classroom for a few years now. And it's coming at a moment where there is more and more interest, not only on this, I would say more and more interest and more need on college campuses, not just our college campus, but colleges and universities around the country. This has become a growing imperative to include talking politics, discourse, as an element of teaching democratic citizenship, beyond voting, beyond volunteering, beyond advocacy. being able to talk politics. And so, based on the work that I've done in the classroom, there's a national effort rooted in the Citizens and Scholars faculty, the Institute for Citizens and Scholars. They've created something called the Citizens and Scholars Faculty Institute, Dialogue Across Difference and Civil Discourse in the Classroom. So it's a consortium of, I think, 10 to 15 universities. Rutgers University is one of them. I'm happy to be one of 2 delegates from Rutgers University. Professor Catherine McCabe from the Political Science Department is the other delegate. And what it's meant to be is really a community, build a community of scholars, practitioners who will create courses on their on their campus and share them with the Institute, or take existing coursework that they do. Again, doesn't have to be political science, but infuse it with some of these best practices of discourse and engaging in conversation. It may be creating university-wide programming. So it was launched this summer. This is the first year. I would imagine it will be an ongoing project out of Citizens and Scholars. And it will allow me, with my colleague, Professor Catherine McCabe, and hopefully others on this call, to extend this work across Rutgers University. First on our list of our wish list is to create some professional development workshops that would be available not just to faculty of all disciplines. Again, offering everyone the knowledge base, the resources. There's a good amount of research out there now on not only the impact, but the best practices, or I'm sorry, the impact of using these best practices, but then also how they contribute to a broader conceptualization of American democracy. But then certainly we hope to create broader opportunities to engage in difficult conversations, whether it's the students who are coming in our classroom, whether it's holding, we typically have a series called Pizza and Politics that certainly we will be doing in spring, certainly we'll be doing in the fall, where we bring students to Eagleton to talk politics over pizza. So an opportunity for students of all disciplines, whether or not they're taking a class here at Eagleton or not, to just come and talk about politics in a moderated discussion. And there are all sorts of opportunities to do this broadly. What I would say before I start to wrap up is, while there is a tremendous need and there's tremendous value to embedding political discourse in our classrooms, in our events, it must be done intentionally, and it must be done by using the best practices that are out there. I think, again, there's a nice large toolkit of how to engage students in discussion in a way that's productive and leaves them feeling secure. And so really encouraging folks to make use of those best practices. And I know there is a real effort on this campus, and I think was referenced earlier by Prabhas, to provide more and more faculty support along those lines. If you didn't attend the Center for Faculty Success last week or the week before, had a great webinar on how to support faculty at this moment who are trying to include political discussion in the classroom. I know there will be more and more. There are other resources out there on campus. I'm just sharing what we do here at the Eagleton Institute of Politics. I want to end with, this is a borderline shameless plug, but I do have a text coming out by the Rutgers University, published by Rutgers University Press in the spring, called "To Keep the Republic Thinking, Talking, and Acting Like a Democratic Citizen." And it's based on this quote by Benjamin Franklin, which probably many of you have heard. In researching for my book, did a little bit of research on this quote, and we certainly have heard a lot about it in recent years in discussions about the fragility of democracy. But the story goes that in 1787, when the Constitutional Convention was wrapping up and the framers were coming out of Constitution Hall, and people standing outside were wondering and called out to Benjamin Franklin, what was the result? What was the governmental system that you created? A monarchy or a republic? And he is said to have responded, a republic if you can keep it. Now, I've learned in doing my research, there's a probably good chance that that really didn't happen, and that's folklore. We have very little evidence that he actually said that. And we know he may have said, there's some evidence that he may have said it to this one Philadelphia socialite who then repeated it. Folklore or not, I think it's really valuable because it highlights a few things. First, the fragility of democracy and democratic practices and norms, but also the shared responsibility that we have in keeping the republic. So again, it's nice to come back and see former colleagues, new senators on this call. Again, I want to thank Senator Simmons for inviting me and for the role she is playing as a role model, as I was fortunate to have when I was a member of the University Senate. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Matto, for your presentation and for sharing your expertise with us and staying on time. High five.
Hey, pretty good. I'm not usually good at that.
Open the floor to questions. I see we have hands. Just to try to get everybody, let's try to keep it to 2 minutes as we can with your questioning. Back and forth is encouraged, just to be mindful for everybody. Thanks so much. Senator Scott, go ahead.
Yes, my question is to kind of refocus on two of the other issues you raised, which was the matter of political engagement and student decision making, right? Because the reality is sometimes if the demand is civility and your complaint is food insecurity, it can feel pretty patronizing, right? So very recently, I attended an open hearing held by the University Senate Student Affairs Committee and the Budget Committee. It was about tuition. The problem was it was very badly attended. Students did not show up. Yet, it was a genuine opportunity for political engagement with Rutgers and for students to be involved in decision making. It was a real opportunity for that. Now, why did this fail? I mean, it failed because we, right, and I sort of maybe to paraphrase Franklin, I feel like we've got a university senate if we can keep it, right? And one of the things that prevents us from being a productive body, right, is we can't communicate with anyone, right? We meet and we have no way to communicate with our constituents. And there was no way to announce this open hearing. And I think that's why there was poor student attendance. So I guess my question is, I mean, I am not a political scientist. I'm not going to be doing political engagement in all of my classes. But as a university senator, right, I want to engage with, well, both students and faculty and everyone we're supposed to be representing. So I suppose the question is very broadly, what can we as a Senate and senators do to increase that engagement, to bring people into decision making, right? To keep shared governance in the face of a structure that inhibits us from communicating, and in the face of a president who won't show up and talk to us.
So thank you, Senator Scott, for your question. One thing that pops into mind as you were saying, as you were offering your question, is and I believe it was one of the charges I was responsible for when I was chairing the Senate Student Affairs Committee, was trying to get more students to run to know that there was a university senate, to serve on a university senate. And I'm sorry, I don't have the resolution number in front of me. When we did come up with a plan on how to enhance that communication. So the first thing I would say is not just related to the Senate, but there's so many there's so many political learning opportunities for our students on the Rutgers campus that they often don't know about, or they don't have the time for, the bandwidth for. So there's certainly that, making them aware of it. But I think what I would say is even, certainly through the Senate, but this is a role that all faculty can play in a variety of ways. I know one of my goals as director of the Eagleton Institute is finding ways to embed political engagement in the student experience, making sure students, as they are coming for new student orientation, know the civic engagement opportunities they have available to them. Offering resources on Canvas that all faculty could use and embed in their own Canvas site. I won't go too off here, but I honestly, it's worth mentioning that in 2020, when we were all virtual, I remember coming and doing a presentation to the Senate then about the incredible role that faculty played, because they had the closest link to students in 2020 when we were virtual. They were seeing everyone through their Zoom. So I hear you, Senator Scott, and I thank you for your question. And certainly that's one of my goals, is to embed in numerous places, not solely the Senate, ways in which students can gain that political learning experience.
Thank you so much. Senator Sloan, welcome.
I just wanted to take this opportunity to congratulate you, Dr. Matto. I am a faculty associate at Eagleton presently. I was appointed by John Farmer a few years back. I love your work. I'd be proud to be a midwife of the work and carry it over to Rutgers, Newark. Years ago, I studied with colleagues in Australia a technique called reflecting teams that really looks to reflecting difference rather than immediate pathologizing, judging difference. And I actually studied graduate students at Rutgers, New Brunswick. So I'd be happy to share this information with you. But more than anything, I'm just really excited. Oh, and I'm brand new to the Senate, and I'm a member of the Student Affairs Committee. So
Oh, good. Then we'll talk. Okay, I'm making myself a note.
Thank you.
Email Elizabeth Sloan. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Senator Neville, did I get it right?
Pretty close, Knievel.
Knievel, all right, thank you.
Dr. Matto,
Yes.
everything you said sounds so interesting to me. I'm in the political science department in Camden, and I'm a colleague of Kelly Dittmar.
Yes, I am part of the Kelly Dittmar fan club.
As well you should be. I was going to say, I think a talking politics class is almost the perfect class that we need for students, right? And as far as the students in Newark and Camden go, like, I always wonder about the logistics of this. Is it better to have a single class where students from all three campuses meet in the same place, or to have parallel classes across the three campuses? And I just would love to hear your thoughts on that. I'm personally kind of agnostic about it, but just logistically speaking, I think it would be easier to have classes across three campuses, but I'd love to know what you think about that.
It's a great question, and I wish I had a good answer. I think, I know one of the, similar to the conversation or my response to Senator, to Senator Scott, whenever we can be finding ways to embed this in campus culture and throughout campus culture, I'm looking for. And I know for myself, I would love it if, I know a lot of students take XPOS. Is there some introductory course that everyone has to take, that even if it's not, you're making them all take talking politics, but you're at least infusing it with some similar content, similar reading, similar exercises. So in my mind, I think building a model on a campus that can be modified to meet the needs of your campus is probably the ideal. I think faculty need and deserve the flexibility to speak to their students, to speak to their campus community, to speak to local politics. I think not just the local politics of a university, but to be able to speak to what's going on in Camden, what's going on in Newark, what's going on in New Brunswick. So I think there's a lot to be said for having a model syllabus that individual faculty can adapt for their own students and their own campus, but with a fair, maybe not identical, but a real skill set for moderating those conversations. I think that's probably something that I hear from faculty a lot. We heard from faculty after the 2020 election saying, I wanted to talk politics in the classroom. I knew I needed to talk politics in the classroom, but I didn't know how. I didn't feel I had the skill set. I was leery of doing it. So providing faculty across all campuses with that professional development, some best practices, that would be something I think that can and should be done university-wide. But thank you for the question.
I agree 100%. And I would love to reach out to you to talk about this.
Okay, great. I'm writing your name down too. Thank you, Senator.
All right, thank you.
Senator Sonnenberg, go ahead.
Hey, thank you very much for your talk. One thing you mentioned was fact checking. We seem to be entering a post-truth world in which, with the internet and with some of the less responsible media that's available, people seem to be entitled to their own facts. as well as their own opinions. And it seems to me that the approach that we need to take with students is not only to teach them that they need facts, but to teach them how to evaluate the information that they get. And in healthcare, we call it evidence-based reasoning, and I think we need evidence-based politics as well. So I wanted to ask you how we can overcome that problem.
It's a great question, and I was going to pitch it back to you in that one thing I hear frequently, and maybe you all do in your classrooms, we are fortunate in many ways, but our students are eager, unlike in ways that are different from previous generations. Millennial generation, Gen Z, they want to be politically engaged. They are demonstrating an interest in politics. It's showing up on election day. They are hungry and they are frustrated by the challenges of gathering news and consuming news. I frequently hear in my classroom, I want to be paying attention to politics. I don't know what news to trust. I don't know where to get news. I don't know how to validate if things are accurate or not. And I honestly think, and I don't know if there are faculty here from School of Communication Information, I would imagine there are. I think there's actually a real need to either have standalone courses on how to consume news, or to have a similar set of best practices as we have some best practices for talking politics. I think having best practices, that a toolkit that we could share across disciplines would be valuable and is needed. If there are people on the call who know of them, I don't feel like I have those readily available to me. And you are welcome. If you know, please shoot me an email. If not, I think this is an area for real growth on this campus. And I would think back to Senator Boykas's comment at the very beginning, I think we could be a real leader. Rutgers University could really be a real leader in building models on how do you embed in all classes, teaching students how to fact check, how to discern fact from fiction. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you.
And Senator Haley, I saw your note and I'm going to write that down. So thank you. I might reach out to you also.
Senator Mazurek, hello.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much
Absolutely.
for such an informative and inspiring presentation. I feel inspired after what you presented and want to learn more. I teach in the engineering school in civil and environmental engineering, and I deal with carbon emissions, decarbonization policies. We deal in facts. And no matter how hard we try to present the facts, the data, expert interpretations, we run into the politics of accepting science. So I'm wondering if it might be a useful thing to have a campus-wide course or courses on the interface or intersection of science and politics, because we do the fact checking, but it's hard for us to communicate in a very polarized world that seems to be driven by political views.
Thank you for that. You've queued me up perfectly in that the Eagleton Institute of Politics, and I'm sorry I don't have the URL handy, but I could send it to Senator Simmons afterwards. The Eagleton Institute of Politics has something called the Science and Politics Program, which is trying to do exactly that. Has two components. One is we have a fellowship for people in mainly natural sciences, graduate students, people in medical school who want to have a better understanding of how their discipline intersects with politics, how they can engage in the policy process, understand the policy process. And with this fellowship program, we actually place our fellows in executive agencies, in state legislative offices, and they provide some expertise, some scientific expertise. And at the same time, are learning the realities of politics and how to advocate for their discipline or how to understand what's necessary. In addition to the fellowship, though, we actually do campus-wide workshops for anyone, that's open to anyone, that really looks at that in particular. What is the intersection of science and politics? What do you need to know on both ends? So there is that conversation that's taking place between scientists and policymakers. The other thing I would mention too, they also have a database that they are building of scientists serving in state legislatures around the country. They know the numbers better than I do, but you can imagine large percentages of public policies have to do with science, whether it's AI, whether it's stem cell research. There's so much policy that is considered that is rooted in science, and very few public officials with a scientific background. So they are also building that database. So I thank you for the question. I think we are doing some of that, but there is much, much more we could do. And I know my colleague who runs that program does have some big dreams of courses that she could create that would be sort of introductory courses for people in the sciences that would help them understand the political process. So I'm going to mark that down, and I'll share those URLs with you also.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Nucci, hello.
Good afternoon, Elizabeth. It's nice to see you again.
Nice to see
So,
you. Hello,
as
hello.
you know, I do a lot of work with Anna at the
That's right,
Science and
yes.
Politics. Yes, but
Perfect.
I really appreciated your conversation today, mostly from the perspective that I've been teaching science communication here at the university for the last 13 years, as well as co-founded the Science Communication Initiative, which really tries to bring together people from across the university are interested in pedagogy, training, and outreach. But one of the things that I think, having done this for 13 years and work with students who, because of course science is very ideologically based, is that it's not just for the students we need to do this, but for faculty as well. Because what I find is that students will bring to class a particular faculty's perspective on politics that is very personal. And I have to kind of guide the students in, you need to look at the person across from you and not call them names. You can't call them idiots. You can't call them more, these terrible names that we tend to call people who don't believe what we believe, but to understand that that's their right in a democratic society to have a perspective. And that if we respect each other, if we are civil, have that civil discourse, which you mentioned, we can change people's minds. And we also have to recognize that we can't force people to be something we want them to be in a democratic society, but we have to reach some level of compromise. So with my students, I leave my beliefs completely out of the classroom, and I will not discuss what I think is correct, but encourage them to have these conversations and try to find some middle ground versus try to deny someone else having the right to have a particular perspective. So I know I'm looking forward to your book. I know you know all this stuff, but again, from the science communication side, I do a lot of work with Anna. As I said, she is amazing and just the perfect person for that job. Great colleague. I'd be glad to participate in any way I can and to connect you with the science communication community at the university and the initiative as well. So it's nice to see you. Thank you for your thoughts.
And I will make sure I let Anna know, who I think is still upstairs, that you phoned or made a comment. Thank you.
Senator Figuera.
Thank you for that very admirably neutral and bipartisan presentation, which I enjoyed. Like many ancient historians, I'm an ex-political scientist, so it resonates with me. But there's a couple of issues I'd raise about this. And one is that our ratcheting up tuition above the level of rising consumer prices, as well as outreach and inclusion of many students from more humble economic backgrounds, leads to a student body that is heavily engaged in work simply to support their educational experience. That has gotten higher and higher as time's gone along. Even about the end of the time of the existence of the separate colleges, where I was heavily involved at Livingston, the numbers were already incredibly alarming. And so that the experience of those students who did not have to work and those students who had to work was already quite dichotomous. And that, I think, is affecting the not only the level of student evaluation, but the level of student knowledgeable evaluation at the university. And to that, we have to add that Rutgers, regardless of ideology, is an authoritarian place. And so the risks of being on the wrong side of an issue are extreme, because we do not have a good ombudsman system here that protects students from arbitrary action. I'll give you an example. A student came to me last year with a letter from a instructor in a composition course, which said that the student was to receive a D, primarily because he had argued from a right-wing MAGA perspective against the content of the readings that had been assigned in the course. This young man, I thought, from my experience of him, was a superlative writer. And in point of fact, the faculty of the PP&E program at Oxford, where he's doing an MPhil, is agreeing with me this year. So there are left-wing examples that kids that are on the left of the spectrum that have the same experience that can be raised as well. I don't want to be
Senator, just a gentle nudge for time.
Yeah. But that's one of the problems. This is a tough place to be held wrong.
Well, and I think the thing what I would mention, so thank you, Senator, for your question, is I think this goes back to the importance of professional development and how important it is that students don't experience that, feel as if their grade is affected because of their political views, because certainly that shouldn't be the case. And to go back to Senator Nucci's comment, it is an opportunity for faculty to demonstrate to students how they can have a strong position, but more importantly, how they can back it up with evidence, how they can support their argument. And the last thought that came to mind from your comment too is often these political learning experiences come from being in the Senate or in extracurricular activities. And as you mentioned, Senator, that's hard for a lot of students, don't have the time because they are working a job, working to pay their tuition, which I would say is why it's even more important for faculty to embed into their courses whenever possible some active learning, experiential learning opportunities, because not all students are able to take the time out to serve on the Senate or to be in an extracurriculum. So thank you for your comment.
Thank you. I agree, but I think we also need better ombudsman programs here to protect our freedom of speech.
Senator Caponegro.
Hi, thank you very much.
Sure.
For this wonderful presentation. I just wanted to make a brief note in support of this. So I am teaching in the writing program, and this year we launched the college writing course, which is the new version of the XPAS.
Yes.
Yes. And one of the texts that we prioritized in this course was a text by Danielle Allen, What is Education For? That I'm sure you're familiar
We just had
with.
her here 3 weeks ago. She just came and spoke. So I should have done this presentation a month ago, but fantastic.
What a wonderful way to collaborate, right?
Yes.
And so this text did put on the horizon for our students terms like I guess civic engagement, civic agency, participatory readiness, and discussions around these very themes that you mentioned. And we are very happy to report that everybody was very much engaged in this conversation and ready to participate, not only in the writing component, but also to be more involved, to learn more about it. So
that's well, I've written your name down also. So that's fantastic. And again, I think that's one of the many challenges at Rutgers is that because we have such a large student body, because we're so geographically dispersed, having those common learning experiences are challenging, but as you've demonstrated, not impossible. So thank you for that.
Senator Cooper, hello.
Hello, thank you so much for this. This is getting my little hamster in my wheel turning quite a bit. And speaking from a staff perspective, so I think that training, especially for staff, would be really helpful because this actually comes up in my conversations a lot. So I work in the Office of Disability Services, and especially with the political climate given in the Middle East, I've had a lot of students I've working with have flares of their symptoms based off of anxiety and based off of lots of different things going on with mental health impacts. And so when I'm having conversations with this, I'm feeling a little guilty because I don't actually know how to have conversations around political topics like this. And so I'm feeling guilty of like, oh no, I don't know how to actually be a better practitioner if my students want to engage in these kinds of topics because it is something that is really impacting them. So I would just be really interested in having some training and also your thoughts on how that makes you a better practitioner to be able to engage in these conversations politically.
So first of all, thank you very, very much for that comment. And It is something that I neglect. I think I put it in a PowerPoint, but worth emphasizing that I think it would be absolutely, this is a shared experience. This should be a campus-wide, university-wide experience. So to restrict it to faculty, I think would be unfortunate and would not be realistic. I think it's really critically important that the same sorts of best practices are shared with staff, that sort of professional development and ways to do that. I would defer to probably you and others on the call about what are the best ways to do that. But certainly, I think including staff, and I would imagine, especially given the office that you're in, staff sometimes is interacting with students in ways that faculty never will. And I think, and staff have political views and come to work with, and we are going to have all sorts of political experience. We're experiencing a significant moment now on our campus as we're heading into 2024. I think we as a campus need to be prepared, how to support each other, how to support ourselves, and how to support our students. And so I think the more pervasive that professional development can be, the better. I'd welcome the opportunity to speak with you also and staff in general. This is not something that staff should be excluded from. I think it should be across campus. So thank you for the reminder.
Thank you, senators, for such a really lively and inspiring discussion. And thank you again, Dr. Matto, for stimulating that inspiring and insightful discussion about what might be possible. Even though it's not perfect, we're moving things forward, even if it's an inch at a time. So thank you for helping us get our wheels turning in this moment. And thanks so much for spending some time.
The hamster's going in my head also. So I really appreciated the feedback. I really appreciate all the comments in the chat, and I'm jotting them down. I certainly will be back in touch with you, Senator Simmons, on sharing more resources. And, not to impose myself, I'm happy to come back as we get closer and closer to 2024. And to just to be sharing resources, faculty development. But thank you for, as someone who has been on that screen and gone to those meetings, thank you for all the time and dedication that you put into the University Senate. It's a critically important body. And I'm proud to be an alum and proud to get to come back and speak to everyone. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.